The looming shadow of criminal convictions, and perhaps even time behind bars, has reportedly ignited profound panic within the association, driving men at the pinnacle of their sport to abandon their home soil to escape an entirely uncertain horizon. Whispers across the league suggest a sudden, massive exodus of professional basketball talent heading overseas, all seemingly sparked by a shockwave of revelations from Jaden Ivey. These profound disclosures carry the immense weight of potential federal probes, casting a harsh, unforgiving spotlight on numerous athletes who now find their legacies and freedom deeply questioned. Today, we are taking a deeply analytical look at those exact words, unraveling the most recent developments and examining how this unprecedented moment might permanently rewrite the very fabric of professional basketball. What we are witnessing unfolds like a truly unprecedented drama. On March 30th, 2026, the Chicago Bulls made a quiet but seismic decision, one that instantly ignited a firestorm across digital platforms, silenced locker rooms, and sparked heated debates in homes nationwide. It was a maneuver that sent profound shockwaves through the entire athletic ecosystem, violently reopening the complex, long-standing conversation regarding the boundaries of deep personal faith and expression inside the rigid structure of professional sports. The legendary franchise officially parted ways with their highly touted guard on March 30th, 2026, pointing to an overarching label of conduct detrimental to the collective organization. This sequence of events was far from a mere coincidence. Just hours prior, the 24-year-old prodigy and former 5th overall draft selection broadcasted his unfiltered truths to the world on social media. He delivered a raw, unapologetic 60-minute testimony completely anchored in his profound Christian convictions. This was the same relentless competitor, taken 5th overall in the 2022 draft by the Detroit Pistons, straight out of a legendary run at Purdue University. Long before the controversy and the spiritual awakening took center stage, he was universally recognized as one of the most electric, high-ceiling foundational pieces in the modern game. Even when brutal injuries tested his mental fortitude and kept him off the hardwood in Detroit, he still produced an impressive 14.9 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 4.0 assists every single night. He was never just an ordinary role player desperately fighting to survive the final cuts at the end of the bench. He was heavily burdened with the monumental expectation of carrying a franchise on his back. Recognizing this raw potential, Chicago brought him in through a massive 3-team exchange on February 3rd. Playing on the final months of his current deal, the front office permanently benched him for the rest of the campaign just days ago. A quiet ending to a stint interrupted by persistent knee pain since February 11th. Across 37 grueling battles this year, with only 4 coming in a Bulls uniform, he maintained a steady offensive output of 8.5 points per contest. And then arrived the digital broadcast that shifted his entire trajectory, staring directly into a lens shared with over 200,000 individuals. The young guard unleashed the absolute, unvarnished depths of his mind. He spoke with total conviction, stating that modern society heavily promotes certain lifestyles and dedicated months of celebration, pointing out that the league actively champions these exact same cultural movements. He highlighted how deeply these ideals are showcased globally, interpreting the institutional invitations to celebrate as an open endorsement of what his spiritual framework defines as deeply unrighteous behavior. According to his unyielding perspective, this messaging is permanently etched onto massive billboards and woven into the very fabric of city streets, a constant promotion of what he perceives as moral failing. He then posed a profound, lingering question about why speaking divine truth is met with such heavy resistance, an assertion notably delivered during a time recognized as the absolute pinnacle of solemn reflection on the Christian calendar. Management ultimately pulled the plug on his tenure by falling back on the incredibly broad and ambiguous corporate label of detrimental behavior. Yet, executives remained completely silent on the actual mechanics of the fallout, leaving the public to endlessly wonder exactly how his spiritual declarations fractured the underlying chemistry of their locker room. Stepping to the podium beneath the harsh glare of arena lights that same evening, head coach Billy Donovan faced the inevitable barrage of questions from the press. The veteran leader carefully navigated the tension, acknowledging the vastly different paths athletes walk, while sternly reinforcing the absolute necessity of maintaining a strictly professional environment at all times. He spoke heavily on the crucial foundations of mutual respect, unconditional support, and unyielding accountability among brothers in arms before subtly pivoting the conversation toward a vastly more complex and sensitive psychological territory. Choosing to bypass the explosive theology entirely, the coach voiced a deep, protective worry regarding the player's internal psychological stability, reminding everyone in the room that the invisible battles of the mind are remarkably real. Refusing to definitively diagnose the young man's deeply personal journey, he openly confessed that the immense pressure and psychological well-being of his athletes perpetually keeps him awake at night. It was a paternal concern extended to the entire roster, yet intentionally framing a passionate religious monologue as a potential psychological crisis, instantly transformed into the most intensely debated element of this entire modern tragedy. If you genuinely want to grasp the gravity of that broadcast, you must deeply analyze the man he was before the cameras turned on, and the completely reborn warrior he claims to have evolved into, following a profound spiritual metamorphosis. He has never hidden the dark, painful realities of his past. In a moment of raw vulnerability, he confessed that before his powerful spiritual awakening, the relentless pursuit of basketball glory was his absolute, undeniable God. He stepped onto the professional hardwood spiritually blind, admitting with brutal honesty that he had absolutely no connection to a higher power during his initial rise to superstardom. He painted a stark picture of a young man consumed by the intoxicating vices of sudden wealth, trapped in toxic cycles of addiction, shallow encounters, and heavy drinking, the only coping mechanisms he actually understood. In the immediate, euphoric aftermath of a grueling victory and a stat sheet full of buckets, the illusion of total supremacy felt incredibly real. He believed he held the entire universe firmly in the palm of his hand. Yet, the inevitable crash always followed. The star athlete slowly realized that the adrenaline spikes of fame were entirely manufactured, fading away almost as quickly as the final buzzer sounded. The breaking point arrived quietly after sinking a clutch, buzzer-beating dagger. Instead of pure joy, he was met with a profound, suffocating emptiness that seemed to overshadow every highlight reel, every roar of the crowd, and every massive deposit. Somewhere in the lonely grind of the professional circuit, an absolute spiritual revolution took hold. He did not settle for a comfortable, surface-level belief system, but rather surrendered to a rigorous doctrine that required the complete sacrifice of his ego. He drew a hard, permanent line in the sand regarding his identity, firmly telling the world that the superficial kid who first entered the league had been completely and utterly eradicated. His sense of purpose was now deeply rooted in an unshakable spiritual foundation, one that totally transcended the confines of the hardwood, and this profound internal fire was never going to remain a hidden, locker room secret. While he occasionally voiced his unyielding convictions during his gritty days in the Motor City, that underlying passion evolved into an overwhelming, intense crusade the moment he put on the iconic red and black uniform. This relentless evangelical drive reportedly caused immense friction behind closed doors, with insiders suggesting that management grew deeply uncomfortable with his unyielding, sermon-like presence in the team's inner sanctum. His digital broadcasts transformed into sprawling 60-minute analytical deep dives, fearlessly tackling everything from the paralyzing darkness of his own mental health battles to the heaviest existential dilemmas of modern society. He would pivot fiercely from exploring divine salvation and dissecting toxic cultural entertainment to delivering intensely sharp social critiques, occasionally lightening the heavy burden with brief, genuine reflections on simple comforts, like a slice of classic American dessert. Inside the training complex, this unconventional approach was steadily alarming the establishment. The atmosphere around him began to shift dramatically, as whispers circulated that the once-focused prodigy was adopting deeply unsettling daily routines that fundamentally broke the unspoken code of the professional brotherhood. In a shocking breach of typical athletic etiquette, he allegedly confronted seasoned reporters with intense, highly personal interrogations regarding their intimate morality. He refused to blend in, he refused to be silenced. From the concrete tunnels of the arena to the glaring lights of press conferences, he was treating every square inch of his life like a pulpit. And just as the noise reached a fever pitch, an unprecedented piece of truth dropped that permanently altered the landscape for anyone paying attention. During a deeply vulnerable pinpoint broadcast, the athlete laid bare his darkest hours. "I have stood on the brink of taking my own life repeatedly, and I feel absolutely zero shame admitting that. I hold no shame simply because a higher power mercifully kept my heart beating. My spouse would desperately plead with me, 'Please retreat. Do not let yourself walk down this agonizing path.'" He traced the origins of this profound psychological unraveling directly to the harrowing aftermath of a devastating physical setback during his early playing days. He pinpointed the onset of this severe mental warfare to the snapping of his fibula on the 1st of January 2025 while wearing a Detroit uniform, marking his initial encounter with professional athletic mortality. This outpouring was clearly far deeper than a frustrated athlete simply venting. We are witnessing a vulnerable human being who navigated the suffocating depths of clinical depression and the grip of substance dependency alongside crushing suicidal thoughts, who ultimately credited his survival to profound spiritual conviction before concluding that remaining quiet about his transformative faith was impossible. Regardless of your personal stance on his core convictions, acknowledging the deeply personal trauma that pushed him toward that microphone remains undeniably essential. Yet, that very human, layered background felt glaringly absent when Chicago's front office abruptly chose to sever ties and walk away. Once his release became official, the lingering tension failed to quietly dissipate. Instead, the entire ordeal rapidly spiraled into a much larger, uncontrollable storm. Taking his fight straight to social media, he launched a blistering counterattack against the organization, flatly declaring, "Those men are completely fabricating the truth, man. This is absolute deception," he passionately insisted. "Falsely claiming my presence tore at the fabric of the locker room is a complete fabrication. Go interrogate every single member of that coaching staff regarding my locker room character. I simply chose to speak openly about my savior, and they tore up my contract." He stressed that his time was spent quietly repairing a damaged knee, never once causing chaos during squad workouts. "People in my innermost circle are abandoning ship purely due to my religious convictions. I am not the architect of my firing. I was grinding inside the facility today. I was attacking my physical therapy, pushing heavy weights, and fulfilling every single obligation my profession demanded. While I could have easily surrendered to despair, they forced me out the door." The crosshairs then shifted during another late Monday digital broadcast, where he sharply critiqued high-profile athletes professing religious devotion, specifically targeting Stephen Curry, challenging their refusal to stand against corporate league mandates, while simultaneously continuing his fierce defense against Chicago, labeling him a disruptive force. By interrogating the spiritual authenticity of the game's universally beloved superstar, he instantly magnetized an avalanche of fresh scrutiny and intense public backlash. He also directed sharp, unapologetic critiques toward the legacy of LeBron James. Casting doubt on the genuine religious commitment of two generational titans exposed a deteriorating situation where the profound private costs began spilling into public view. "My spouse is sitting right inside this house, completely ignoring my existence," he confessed rawly to his digital audience. "The exact people sharing my bloodline are treating me like a pariah just for voicing my beliefs. Championing reality earned me nothing but accusations of a total mental collapse. This fracture is happening within my own home, solely because I chose to champion scripture and refuse to suppress reality." The blinding glare of the controversy soon dragged his spouse, Caitlin, into a deeply distressing and uncomfortable public moment. The domestic fractures appeared increasingly severe after millions watched his wife abruptly flee the camera's view during one of his intensely heated digital sermons. Their brief interaction cut to the bone. She pleaded, "Please, just stop." He instantly deflected. "She truly cares for me." The alienation deepened when he publicly condemned his relatives as agents of darkness for challenging the fiercely confrontational nature of his spiritual awakening. Simultaneously, the broader basketball ecosystem fractured. Retired veteran Kendrick Perkins openly voiced deep concerns regarding the young guard's psychological well-being. It is growing terrifyingly obvious that this young talent requires immediate professional intervention, the former bruiser noted, offering heavy sympathy for the unfolding tragedy. Conversely, prominent television voice Stephen A. Smith took a harsher tone, arguing the athlete was actively incinerating his own professional destiny. You possess an entire lifetime of potential, and you chose to leave it incredibly vulnerable just because you felt an overwhelming need to broadcast your inner thoughts. What is the ultimate endgame here? Is an early retirement the price you are willing to pay? He challenged, though a coalition of faithful peers quickly mobilized to shield the embattled player. A foundational pillar of this unexpected defense came from the professional gridiron, specifically New England's locker room, where powerful ball carrier Trevion Henderson shared a biblical scripture from Matthew, emphasizing the quiet strength required to endure targeted spiritual attacks. Miami Dolphins specialist Blake Ferguson echoed this, sharing a defiant declaration from the Gospel of John. The passage served as a stark reminder that earthly backlash is the guaranteed tax for speaking divine truth. Barely 7 days post-release, the exiled guard shocked absolutely everyone. Digital footage of the ousted athlete delivering impassioned sidewalk sermons rapidly amassed over 40,000 views, courtesy of a weekend upload from local spectator Kedrick Atwater. The raw recording captured the towering 6'3" prodigy draped in a dark, simple tee, crimson athletic pants, and running shoes, methodically pacing as he commanded an impromptu urban congregation through a handheld amplifier on a gritty Chicago street corner. Through the noise, he remained stubbornly anchored to his conviction. His spiritual fervor, rather than locker room toxicity, truly signed his professional death warrant in Chicago. Viewed in absolute isolation, this narrative could easily be dismissed as a cautionary tale of a rogue talent fracturing team chemistry and meeting the inevitable consequences. Yet, reality is rarely that pristine, and the relentless parallels drawn by the sporting public and media veterans to historical league scandals have catapulted this saga light years beyond a solitary social media meltdown. The prevailing question is chillingly basic. This expanding theater surrounding the young guard has transformed into something vastly heavier than a mere roster transaction. This deeply exposes what professional basketball willingly tolerates versus what it actively condemns. Examine the case of Miles Bridges. In June of 2022, authorities in Los Angeles arrested the Charlotte forward, eventually handing down severe felony domestic violence charges stemming from a harrowing incident with the mother of his kids. The survivor bravely released photographs publicly, laying bare the undeniable physical toll. Rather than face trial, the athlete entered a no-contest plea, walking away with a probation sentence through a formalized legal agreement. League officials handed down a 30-game suspension in April of 2023, though he had already sat out the entire 2022-23 campaign. Because of that prior absence, he served merely a fraction of the ban before stepping back onto the hardwood in November of 2023. 30 games for a severe felony. From there, we analyze Milwaukee guard Kevin Porter Jr., whose own troubling legal saga closely mirrored that exact timeline. During September of 2023, New York law enforcement apprehended the former Houston playmaker, handing down assault and strangulation accusations following a brutal dispute with his partner. Houston swiftly traded and released him, prompting a brief Greek stint during the 2023-24 campaign before re-entering the association for 2024-25. He received a shockingly light 4-game banishment from the league, a lenient ruling granted after his legal team secured reduced charges through a plea deal. 4 games for violent strangulation is baffling. Furthermore, the basketball world still quietly grapples with the dark shadows that have haunted Karl Malone for decades. That iconic superstar's legacy remains deeply scarred, forever tied to his involvement with a 13-year-old child when he was already a 20-year-old adult. That disturbing reality produced a child and years of heavy resistance before he owned it. Pivot now to Jaden Ivey, and the league's severe retaliation suddenly paints a concerning picture. This young man never physically harmed a soul. He committed no crimes of malice. He avoided the legal troubles plaguing his peers. He was exiled simply for speaking. His words were anchored in deep spiritual convictions. Regardless of whether his delivery carried too much fire, the timing felt imperfect, or the core message clashed with cultural sentiments. Speaking to the Butler Collegian, student Henry Sturban captured the public's confusion perfectly, noting that both violent offenses were far worse than Ivey's actions. He directly the jarring difference between welcoming a violent offender back and instantly banishing Ivey forces us to examine how executives truly weigh moral integrity against raw athletic potential. Analytical minds recognized a darker subtext hiding within this dynamic. Ivey mirrors Myers Leonard, an expendable asset whose public relations headache completely overshadowed his utility. Viewed purely as a business calculation, the underlying logic is brutally straightforward to dissect. To refresh your memory, Leonard was a Miami center who essentially vanished from professional basketball after carelessly dropping a hateful anti-Semitic slur while broadcasting a video game. As a rotational piece, he was completely disposable. The media firestorm outweighed his on-court contributions, and skeptics believe that exact same ruthless math targeted Ivey. If he possessed generational superstar talent, would Chicago have reacted identically? That glaring hypocrisy places the league's entire moral credibility under intense, unyielding scrutiny. Professional basketball cannot masquerade as an institution built on high ethics while selectively enforcing those exact standards. You cannot brutally silence challenging opinions while continually offering endless second chances and profound grace to athletes involved in horrific physical assaults or dark personal controversies. That exact breaking point makes loyal fans genuinely question the league's true moral foundation. According to reports, the association's established framework for addressing severe domestic violence prioritizes temporary suspensions, mandatory counseling, and internal intervention for athletes, rather than permanent contract terminations. His ultimate downfall was taking a sacred holiday too literally. He lost his career not for brandishing firearms, assaulting women, or addiction, but entirely for publicly defending traditional Christian perspectives on life and human relationships. After the waiver, two pivotal realities began to unfold simultaneously. Jaden Ivey's American basketball future seemingly vanished, while the Chicago Bulls franchise simultaneously started fracturing from intense internal pressure. Addressing his future first, an unnamed executive candidly confessed to journalist Chris Mannix that signing him was impossible, noting his athletic journey must likely continue overseas. That solitary admission essentially cemented his professional fate. Absolutely no franchise wanted to shoulder that blinding media glare. No executive team desired that chaotic media circus. Not a single decision-maker was eager to justify signing a talent who boldly challenged the spiritual authenticity of Stephen Curry and LeBron James, while actively protesting the association's June inclusivity campaigns. Yet Ivey himself refused to completely shut the door on his own path forward. He expressed a quiet resolve, stating that if a chance arose, the location held no weight. Even knowing his American options vanished, stepping onto a foreign court was a welcome sacrifice. He welcomed competing in African leagues, believing location meant nothing as long as he remained steadfastly obedient to his divine purpose. That unwavering faith is everything. It remains the only true metric carrying weight when facing his creator. The international route remains a familiar path for professionals whose domestic dreams shattered due to injuries, public controversies, or severe declines in production. Icons like Magic Johnson, Scottie Pippen, Dominique Wilkins, and Dennis Rodman ultimately played professionally outside American borders. Two-time All-Star Stephon Marbury famously resurrected his legacy overseas, becoming an absolute icon by capturing 3 championship titles for Beijing. Recently, veteran Patrick Beverley voluntarily left domestic arenas, choosing to test his grit in Israel. When examining Ivey's path, the mystery stretches beyond whether international clubs would gamble on his undeniable pedigree as a former top 5 selection boasting elite abilities. The heavier question is whether the league essentially made that choice for him. Additionally, a massive financial safety net undoubtedly softened the blow. The young guard will still collect every penny of his guaranteed $1 million salary for the year. Getting cut certainly left him financially secure. Wealth affords him absolute patience, yet cash cannot salvage the shattered trajectory of his professional journey. This path originally promised a lucrative extension alongside a foundational role in the major leagues. Exactly 1 week after banishing the young guard, the Chicago front office completely imploded as ownership abruptly terminated their top two executives. Ownership fired their lead executives 7 days after the release, ending a 6-year stint defined by one playoff trip and a 224-254 record. Ultimately, the franchise's structural decay extends far beyond a single mismanaged athlete. Yet, the ultimate breaking point materialized days prior, when the organization unceremoniously released the former top 5 draft selection. This followed several volatile social media broadcasts where he passionately voiced polarizing theological beliefs while heavily critiquing the league's progressive advocacy campaigns. Though the resulting public relations nightmare acted as a sudden catalyst, the foundational justification for leadership change had been brewing for years. Over 6 years, they posted a 224-254 record. Still, the timing felt undeniable. Management vehemently argued this shakeup stemmed entirely from chronic on-court mediocrity. However, league whispers suggest the massive cultural fallout from their recent roster casualty was the final blow. Astonishingly, his uniform inventory completely vanished immediately following the sudden release. A profound dilemma looms. Will athletes harboring uncompromising spiritual convictions increasingly seek professional sanctuary abroad? The definitive answer remains elusive. Yet the shifting paradigm is clearly visible. Consider Jonathan Isaac down in Orlando. He stands as one of the most unapologetically devout figures in professional basketball today. Though his employment remains perfectly secure for now, his professional narrative carries the scars of physical trauma and the relentless public interrogation inevitably following a steadfast refusal to echo approved corporate doctrines. The chilling reality athletes are currently digesting is quite simple. An invisible cultural boundary exists, and once crossed, extraordinary physical gifts offer absolutely no salvation whatsoever. This reality transcends the hardwood. Across multiple industries, faithful individuals face intense pressure to champion corporate narratives, fundamentally contradicting their own sacred foundational texts. For a growing multitude, that exact pressure point represents an absolute boundary. Fleeing overseas is no longer an exile strictly reserved for fading veterans or borderline talents. International basketball rapidly evolved into a genuine sanctuary, offering a protected arena blissfully insulated from the crushing ideological demands dominating the modern American athletic ecosystem. Elite European circuits, Chinese professional leagues, Australian courts, and expanding African associations, each presents incredibly lucrative professional avenues entirely stripped of the suffocating cultural gatekeeping currently associated with top American sports leagues. Regardless of whether he laces up his sneakers in Istanbul, commands a backcourt in Beijing, or simply stands preaching on a windy metropolitan corner, his legacy permanently altered the dialogue. He forced every professional peer to confront an introspective dilemma that previously felt entirely hypothetical. How much would it truly cost to vocalize my deepest internal convictions? The ousted guard maintains that front offices remain terrified of his unapologetic faith. Yet his spiritual resolve holds firm. Ultimately, what value exists in conquering the material world while quietly surrendering your spirit? That existential inquiry carries far more weight than any viral broadcast, sweeping executive termination, or defiant surge in apparel sales. It is the precise reason this compelling human narrative has only just begun.